And good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. I appreciate so very, very much you being with me. I hope your week's going well. Here, the second day of the week. All right, and we want to jump. I want to jump right into the lesson this morning and sharing some thoughts with you about the entrance into the most holy place. Uh, this is really quite an important, not to mention fascinating subject, and the reason it is so important is because of the typology, type, and antitype of Christ serving as a high priest to accomplish atonement. And, we're constantly told, people, just this last week, pardon me, they post on my YouTube video, Romans chapter 5, verse 11, that says, speaking of Christ and his sacrifice, through whom we have, past tense, received the atonement. And so these individuals are saying, see, the atonement was already completed. It was already consummated. They simply deny, and that's all it is. It's a denial that Hebrews chapter 9 posits Christ coming out of the most holy place, his appearing the second time, in other words, his second coming, as the time of the consummation of the atonement concept and the atonement practices. Okay? But again, that goes back to the reality of the type and the antitype of the Old Testament typological actions of the high priest to kill the sacrifice, go into the most holy place, and come again to bring salvation. And so we're being told, well, no. Hebrews chapter 9 is not talking about atonement. It's talking about something totally unrelated to that. You would never get that from a narrative reading of Hebrews chapter 9, but people's theology influence their reading of the text. So what I want to do, as I've been demonstrating, and I hope that you'll go back and watch yesterday's video to examine this terminology of Christ appearing again apart from sin. That's very, very important, okay? But what I want to do this morning, and I keep bumping into my desk here, what I want to do this morning is to drive this point home that the atonement and the opening of the most holy place could not occur until the arrival of the new creation. Now, I've already shared with you that Hebrews chapter 9, verse 11, posits the old covenant world, and I'm going to turn over here and I'm going to read this from Hebrews chapter 9, verse 11. Now remember, the context here is the Day of Atonement practices. The writer has just spoken to us and said, as long as the first covenant, as long as the ordinances of that first covenant temple system stood valid, there was no forgiveness of sin. Well, if there's no forgiveness of sin, there's no entrance into the most holy place. But, he says, Christ has become the high priest of good things to come. Those good things had not yet come. Now, I understand, and I appreciate the fact that there's actually a textual variant. However, the King James got it pretty right here. The textual variant is not the preferred rendering, the textual variant that says of the good things that have already come. Now, could it be argued that through the death, burial, and resurrection, the beginning of the proclamation of the gospel, that good things had begun to arrive? Well, of course. Nobody's denying that. But the writer of Hebrews is focused on entrance into the most holy place. The Holy Spirit is testifying to this, that the way into the holiest of all is not yet made manifest while that first tabernacle, while that first covenant, while that covenant cultus remained valid and binding, remained standing, having standing. That's his focus. As long as the old covenant stood, there was no forgiveness. As long as there was no forgiveness, there was no entrance into the most holy place. So entrance into the most holy place and forgiveness is the goal of the terminology of the good things about to come. And, it's really interesting to me that people say, well, it says the good things to come. That's true. Well, it's from the Greek word melo in the infinitive. And the Blast of Brunner Greek grammar says melo with the infinitive means imminence. And not only that, and for those who appeal to the textual variant, they evidently are willing to completely overlook Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1 and 2. Now the law, having a shadow of the good things about to come, or the good things to come, if you want to use it that way, but it's literally about to come. Okay? And by the way, if you want some good documentation of this, Robert Mounce, who is a world-renowned Greek scholar, just go on the internet and in your web browser, look up Robert Mounce on Melo. Robert Mounce has postings on different Greek words and their conjugations and what have you. One should not take lightly Robert Mounce's definitions of melo. About to be on the point of. And here's the point. There is no textual variant in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1 that I'm aware of. Maybe, but I'm not aware of it. So here's what we have. We have many Greek manuscripts that give melo in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 11, which is not rendered, cannot be rendered as have already come. It's not in the perfect tense. Melo is not. But some people want to appeal to a textual variant and say, oh, well, the variant says of the things that have come. So they want to ignore Hebrews chapter 10, for which there is no variant, which says the law was a shadow of good things about to come. And yes, there are some versions, there are some translations that do render it that way. So the point of it being here, the good things that were about to come from the perspective of Hebrews, once again to reiterate and to acknowledge, good things had already begun to happen through the blood of Christ, through the sacrifice of Christ. However, that work was not consummated. And the consummation, that is entrance into the most holy place, was still the good things about to come, just like Colossians chapter 2 says. Let no man judge you in respect of new moons, feast days, and Sabbaths, which are present, active, indicative. And once again, we have people wanting to change the Greek tenses based on their theology, not based on linguistics, not based on grammar, but because of their theology. So when Colossians was written, those feast days were still shadows of the good things about to come. And Hebrews 9, Christ became a minister of the good things to come. And Hebrews 10, the law was still, when Hebrews was written, a shadow of the good things about to come. Now watch. Hebrews 9, verse 11, as the writer says, and I wanted to go back over that territory to refresh our memories, Christ has become a high priest over the good things to come, by a greater and more perfect tabernacle. Now watch the terminology that he uses. Not made with hands, that is to say, not of this creation. Now, is he saying that what is he saying? Well, he's saying, first of all, that the first tabernacle, the first temple, really was of this creation. It was made with hands. And listen, folks, if you've never done a study of the terminology of made with hands and not made with hands, you really ought to do that. Because if you've never done a study like that, you're missing out on a wealth of fantastic concepts, a wealth of understanding of the contrast between the old covenant and the new. So what do we have in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 11? We have the affirmation, as long as the old covenant stood, there was no forgiveness, no entrance into the most holy place, but Christ became a minister over the true tabernacle, a tabernacle not made with hands, not of this creation. Well, you see, this creation in his context is talking about the old covenant creation that could not bring man into the presence of God. But Christ became a minister over the good things about to come that could do, those good things about to come could do what the then present creation, i.e., the temple, the cultus, the sacrifices, could never do, i.e., bring man into the presence of God. It is a contrast between the old covenant creation and the coming new covenant creation. The old creation could not bring man into the presence of God. The new covenant creation could bring man into the presence of God. When could man enter the most holy place? Well, what is this most holy place? It's the new creation into which man could come. In Revelation 21, after the destruction of Babylon, the city where the Lord was crucified, John says, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. And I saw a new Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven. Folks, it is not the church leaving earth. Do you catch the power of that? I saw the new Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven. And the Spirit saying, the tabernacle of God is with man. Oh, wait a minute. We got to go back to the garden, right? In the garden was God's presence. The Jewish rabbis used to teach, many scholars acknowledge the garden was a microcosm of the temple, or more specifically, the most holy place. The presence of God. But you see, sin entered, and man was cast out of the presence of God. And the narrative, the biblical story, expressed in Ephesians chapter 1, 9 and following, that it was God's eternal intent before the foundation of the world. It was God's intent that he, that is God, would gather together all things in one body that are in heaven and that are in earth. What was God's eternal purpose? To restore fellowship between heaven and earth. And what do we find in Revelation chapter 21? I saw the new Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven. It is the restoration of the most holy place. It is the restoration of fellowship between God and man. When does it come? Did it come at the cross? Well, that kind of destroys the temporal narrative of Revelation, doesn't it? That says that the new creation, the new Jerusalem, didn't come until the destruction of the old. And you can see this even in Galatians chapter 4, in which Paul contrasts two women, two sons, two covenants, two mountains, two cities. He speaks of the, quote, Jerusalem that now is and is in bondage with her children, and the Jerusalem that is above, who is the mother of us all. But had that new Jerusalem fully arrived? Well, Hebrews chapter 12 certainly tells us they were standing at the cusp of the reception, because the writer of Hebrews says, you have not come to the mountain that could not be touched, that burned with fire and tempest and smoke. And if so much as an animal touches that mountain, it's to be thrust through with a spear. No, you have come to Mount Zion. Well, what's Mount Zion? It's the temple. It's the Temple Mount. You have come to the New Jerusalem. Ah, there, see, Preston, it's already come. No, Hebrews chapter 13, verse 14. We do not have here any abiding city, which is ironic. His use of irony here is incredible, because he's speaking of the then present physical city of Jerusalem, which the Jews viewed as the eternal city. I know it had already been destroyed, yes, blah, 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 in 586 BC. But they still viewed it and lovingly referred to it as the eternal city. But he says, we do not have here an abiding city, but we seek one that is about to come. Melo, in the infinitive. So, while on the one hand, the New Testament writers speak of the New Jerusalem and even the new creation, i.e. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17, if any man is in Christ, he is new creation. Okay, there's the already. But it was not the consummated already, or not yet. You've come to Mount Zion, the New Jerusalem. But we seek a city that's yet to come. Already, not yet. So what do we find in Revelation? Once again, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. I saw a new Jerusalem. Folks, this is the new creation that stands in stark contrast to the, quote, this creation, unquote, of Hebrews chapter 9, verse 11. Do you catch the power of this? This is beautiful. So we have this new Jerusalem that is directly related to the new creation, a new creation not made with hands. And John, in describing that new creation, this new Jerusalem, what does he say? Revelation 21, verse 22. In describing, once again, that new Jerusalem, he says, there was no temple, there was no naos there, because the Father, the God, and his Son are the temple. They are the naos. They are the most holy place. And they brought the new creation at the destruction of the old. So, folks, how can it be possible to affirm that from Pentecost onward, men were truly entering the most holy place, if in fact the most holy place, i.e. the New Jerusalem, the new creation, did not arrive until the destruction of the old creation? I've been asking this question for a good long while. I have yet to receive a solid answer. I've received lots of words, but no solid answer. Okay? Okay, I'm out of time. Tomorrow, we're going to take a look at a little bit different aspect of Yom Kippur. What about this scapegoat thing? How does that fit the typology of Jesus and his sacrifice and the Day of Atonement? Well, we'll try to look into that on the flip side.